some very important issues that I think we have facing the profession. A few years ago, thank you for the introduction, Mark. A few years ago, I used to write occasional columns for Solicitors Journal, so it's nice to be able to perhaps speak to some of the people who may at some point have read some of the things that I wrote a little while ago. Last year, as Mark said, we conducted some research into what the future might bring to the legal profession, which resulted in this report, The Future of Legal Services, published in January. Colleagues have copies here, if anyone would like them, certainly available on the website. The findings show that solicitors face a future of change. That perhaps is not new, but what we wanted to do is for everybody to understand what the drivers of that change may be. Let me start with technology. Later today, the Chancellor of the Exchequer will deliver a budget statement in Parliament. Over the weekend, George Osborne confirmed that trials of driverless cars would take place in Britain in 2017, and there should be driverless vehicles on the roads by 2020. He's expected to publish proposals this summer to eliminate rules that prevent autonomous driving on motorways. He wants Britain to be a global leader in that market and wants the law to change and to adapt to fulfil that ambition. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Tom Watson, has gone even further, suggesting the government should appoint a Minister for Automation. So what seemed like fiction at one time is now becoming a reality. Changes in our practices, our firms, our businesses are being reshaped by technology. Our judicial system, our courts, our tribunals, our laws, our policies, our regulation, all being reshaped by technology. And thanks to technology, firms are now changing or rethinking their own processes and their business models. Let me give you some examples of that. Many firms have improved the way they conduct legal research using systems like IBM's ROS. For those of you who haven't heard it, it's a tool that allows practitioners to use natural questions and language rather than keywords. It provides citations and suggests topical reading for a variety of sources rather more quickly and much more comprehensively than ever before. It leads to better advice, faster problem solving and better solutions for our clients. Firms are considering the impact of technology on their own workforce. HR departments are reassessing what new skills, what new knowledge, what aptitudes are needed for new recruits or trainees. So perhaps just being qualified as a solicitor will not be enough, particularly in a competitive environment. Proficiency on social media, on communications, even on coding. I was speaking to a firm only yesterday who said that's something which they look for in new trainees, if they can code. If only I knew what that was, that would be great. But if you're a new trainee now, that may be a skill which you'll require. Not just as it used to be if you could speak a second language. The language of coding may be the thing which enables you to get the job. So that can be a real asset for firms when they are directly coupled to legal advice. So not just have someone in IT who can code and a solicitor over here, the two together. Firms are reviewing their own learning and development programs, finding ways to support their staff in the way that new technologies work, helping them to prepare for areas of law that can change more rapidly, so intellectual property or data protection, for example. Some firms might consider whether their existing business models are fit for the future. We know that technology often drives change in business structure, so firms of solicitors and other professionals might look at different models to provide those services. A number of local authority teams, just as an example, have set up alternative business structures to be more competitive and to reach a wider audience. It's change being driven in that way. So technological improvements are inspiring solicitors to think differently about the future. The courts are also embracing technology. They're moving away from paper-based systems towards online, albeit slowly. The Lord Chief Justice's report to Parliament indicated, and I quote, outdated IT systems severely impede the delivery of justice, unquote. In response, hundreds of millions of pounds, some of it from the sale of court buildings, have been allocated for the modernisation of IT in the courts and tribunals and to modernise their procedure. Modernise, of course, according to the judiciary, may not be the same thing as the profession. As part of that modernisation programme, proposals have been put forward for an online court for settlement of claims up to £25,000. Now, although we, as a law society, fully support the need for the judiciary to have fully functioning IT systems, it's absolutely critical, from our perspective, that for access to justice, legal advice remains available for the people who need it. Clients seeking to recover money or assessing their rights will still need legal advice, as well as assistance in navigating their way through the process, whether online or otherwise. Everybody, particularly the most vulnerable, must have access to justice. Artificial intelligence, AI, has become part of our lives. Siri on your iPhone is artificial intelligence. It's used for diagnostics, for the early diagnosis of cancer. It is indeed around everywhere. The applications of technology are already having legal consequences on areas such as tort and data protection. AI's uses will become more complex, more sophisticated. As I said, the Chancellor said that by 2020 we're going to have driverless cars on our roads. There are a number of legal questions that flow immediately from that. Who's responsible in the event of an accident? Is it the person in the car? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the owner of the car? The US Department of Transport have already opined that when it comes to regulating self-driving cars, computers and software systems might be considered the driver of those vehicles. What parameters are there going to be for the testing when they're in our streets and our motorways, perhaps as early as 2017? Remember a couple of weeks ago, Google driverless car hit a bus in a town not far from Pasadena. Sounds like a great title for a song. Solicitors can help the government answer these questions effectively by working with policymakers and legislators. We want to ensure that the proper legal safeguards are in place for the safe and effective use of this type of technology. So what will the future bring? Legal self-diagnosis facilitated by AI is likely to be more readily available, but it will never, I would suggest, be a complete replacement for solicitors. Online dispute resolution, ODR, used as sites like eBay and CyberSettle, will undoubtedly be popular. Systems aim to broaden access to justice and resolve disputes more easily, quickly, more cheaply. But there are concerns about ODR when an unrepresented claimant takes on a corporation because of the inequality of arms between the two. The second driver I want to speak on about is globalisation and economic change. A number of city, US and UK firms have benefited from an increase in globalisation. They have strong client relationships, they have global and national corporations, they've been able to increase rapidly their global footprint. So what will the future bring in the legal business market? How will globalisation and economic changes have an impact to that? We're going to see more globalisation, and with this comes increased competition from other jurisdictions. For example, right now, Singapore are having a major push on international arbitration and other emerging markets. People are trying to park their tanks on our lawn. With corporations looking globally for further growth, there will be a greater need for in-house counsel who understand the global requirements of their businesses. So the breadth of responsibility, I would suggest, for in-house counsel will expand, and the numbers of in-house solicitors are likely to increase. Last year, just over 20% of solicitors worked in-house, and we can absolutely expect that to increase for a number of reasons. Foreign investors from countries like China and Russia and India have changed the global landscape. The future will bring, I'm sure, more cross-country partnerships, which will require expert legal advice. Globalisation will also continue to drive firms to pursue their options in overseas markets. The extent to which businesses expand their operations international will impact on the type of advice which is needed. The Law Society is working with governments, other law societies, other bar associations at home and abroad to open up new legal markets to enable our solicitors, those qualified here, those expert in the law of England and Wales, to practice law in those other jurisdictions. Only last week I launched a guide to doing legal business in China to support firms and solicitors who wish to establish themselves there. I mentioned coding earlier on. I was having a conversation with a firm in Hong Kong a short while ago who want to open up in China. Their issue is, whilst they can find people who can speak Mandarin, they can't find many people who can write it competently and have the ethos of a firm from England and Wales. There are business opportunities for those who want to go and find them. The third driver is the wider political agenda, which can affect the paradigm in which we operate. So in addition to changes in the legal market, the government's policy on justice and legal issues also has an impact on the profession. Almost a year ago now, the Lord Chancellor acknowledged in England and Wales that there are two nations in our justice system, one for the rich and another one for everybody else. I absolutely agree with his assessment. Not only are we seeing a two-nation justice system, we have a significant erosion of the rule of law, which I can give you some numbers for. Now some 600,000 fewer people entitled to civil legal aid, roughly equivalent to the population of Luxembourg. Courts and tribunal fees increased by up to 600%, 40 times more expensive in England and Wales than in New York. The fees disproportionately affect people on lower income and on small businesses. Recently I appeared as a witness in front of the Justice Select Committee to raise those concerns with parliamentarians on those issues, and they were very sympathetic to them. 86 courts and tribunal buildings in England and Wales will be closing in the next few months. 22 of those closures, the government is now looking in more detail where the work will transfer and what other arrangements can be made to ensure access to justice for vulnerable clients. On criminal legal aid, some progress. The government abandoned, as we all know, its two-tier duty contract system for legal aid, for criminal legal aid. Lord Chancellor has provided assurances that there will be no competitive tendering, which is good news indeed, and it gives solicitors practicing criminal defence work a scintilla of certainty for the future. We also welcome the suspension of the second 8.75% cut. We will continue to engage with the ministerial team on behalf of the profession and indeed with other colleagues who practice in that area and other organisations to make the argument on change which will still have the potential to impact the justice system and undermine the rule of law. So against the backdrop of cuts to legal aid, increases in court fees and court closures, the government is now conducting an inquiry into the profession. In the next few weeks, the Ministry of Justice will consult on the separation of regulation and representation in the legal services sector. Simultaneously, the Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, are leading a study into the competitiveness of the legal services market and the potential of barriers for access. Consultation will give the Ministry of Justice and Parliament an opportunity to reform the Legal Services Act 2007, and we welcome that approach, because these changes to the sector present for us an opportunity for a vision of simpler and better regulation to protect consumers, to protect clients. We've seen consumer and business needs changing, and the legal services sector will adapt to that. But at a time of uncertainty, it is really vital that we create a new regulatory landscape to protect England and Wales as the global jurisdiction of choice. The perception of legal independence free from state interference is absolutely crucial to that. So the Law Society believes that the setting of standards of entry to the legal profession, to the solicitor's profession, and to award the title of solicitor should sit with the profession itself and through the Law Society. To conclude, I'd like to reiterate that we are in a period of unprecedented change as a result of globalisation, of technology, and of reductions in public spending on justice. There are significant opportunities on the horizon, but there are challenges. And as the Law Society, it's our duty and our mandate to support, to promote, and to represent the profession in this period of change. Thank you.
Is this the end of the high street practice? If so, is the Law Society concerned? Is the Law Society going to do anything about it?
So, yes, I think the straight answer to your question is no, it's not the end of that. I think there's a change taking place on the high street. You mentioned the high street, but there has been for years and years. There's certainly some consolidation going on. We see that in terms of the number of firms, because a critical mass can be important in some areas of business. But that's partly because solicitors are very competitive with each other. We have around 10,500 firms who are competing against each other. People sometimes say, well, I'm really worried about, supermarket law. Actually, the competition for them today is the firm down the road on the high street. So I think we'll see a bigger divergence. So perhaps fewer number smaller firms and perhaps fewer in the middle and more big firms. In the same way that the accountancy profession is divided. But what I see on the high street, and I travel around the country, all over the country, and talk to firms, is a really vibrant legal sector. I see lots of solicitors running really good businesses where they know their client base, they've adapted to it, they've worked out what it is, they've worked out what the future is, they're well capitalised. They're not always earning vast amounts of money, but they are really proud to be pillars of their community and in business in their communities for many, many, many years. Just depends where they are and the market in which they're competing, and that becomes more competitive. And those drivers, for example, like the lack of legal aid in some areas of the country, will be much more problematic. But I really do think there is a future, and the Law Society is very ready, willing and able to help support those practices in whatever way we can.
Thank you. Any questions? There's a mic coming.
Hello, my name is Laura Clinch. I'm the managing editor of Solicitors Journal. I think these plans have been shelved just for the moment while government prepares for a Brexit or not. But could you comment on Go's initial idea or very early stage proposals of a pro bono tax to kind of support the cuts that have been made to legal aid to kind of subsidise them?
Yes, you're talking about the levy that was proposed or floated quite some time ago. Well, it's recently been reported that that's been put on the back burner. There was certainly a lot of adverse comment from the city, and not just from solicitors, from City UK as well. I personally thought it needed a lot more thinking through. If you're talking about the top 100, what does that mean? There were some very live international firms who would simply move their business elsewhere and seek to avoid. I'd also question what it was really going to achieve in terms of what it was giving back. I think the other education piece that was done very well was the city showing the Lord Chancellor how much pro bono, how much other corporate social responsibility work was actually done. And if I have a criticism of the profession is we do all this stuff, we don't talk about it. Pro bono just doesn't just happen in big firms, it happens all over the country, all the time. But we keep it quiet, it's part of our professional duty. So he was certainly very receptive to learning how much was actually going on, because there's a perception it's not very much. As I say, I think the idea seems to have gone on the back burner, not necessarily gone away, but we need to keep demonstrating as a profession what we are really giving back, because we're all proud to do that.
Thank you. There's a gentleman there, a gentleman back there.
Good morning. My name is Tariq Chowdhury. I'm from Kingdom Solicitors. I don't know whether this question has been asked or been described. What would be the effect if Britain get out of the UK? Europe.
Well, there are two different answers to that question. The Law Society has produced a report. If you have a look at our website, you'll see we commissioned some research. The Law Society is, of course, politically neutral on that. People have different views. But we commissioned some research from Oxford Economics, some independent research. The broad conclusion of which is that if we were to leave the European Union, it's likely that the legal sector would still grow, but probably grow more slowly, disproportionately slowly, because a large part of our work, of the whole profession, not perhaps for the high street, but the whole profession is dependent on financial services, and in financial services in the broadest sense. And that work is likely to be diminished if we were to leave the European Union. So that was one of the outcomes of that. We are a globally competitive place. We are the absolute leader, #1 in the world, and people want to come here for all sorts of reasons. So it may have an effect on that. It's certainly been said that there'll be lots more work for solicitors for years and years for unpicking them. But actually, if you listen to what many of the large city firms are saying, well, it would be that, but that's relatively short term. They're more interested in what their clients are saying, where their clients are going to go, what sort of business is taking place. I think more generally, a period of uncertainty is never good for business generally, whichever way it is. But we'll see. Otherwise, I'd say the Law Society is politically neutral on the matter. There are some very strongly held opinions on both sides.
There's a gentleman there.
It's John Listeners from Listeners Law. Do you think the Law Society could be a little more helpful with some of our generous fees to them in providing more technical information, computer information, online, at least on the library? For instance, something like PLC, which for sole solicitors becomes very expensive these days. And they won't negotiate down from ridiculous prices because one doesn't always need it. But I think certainly a large organisation like ours should have the funds to pay, subscribe at least to the PLC, which is available at the Law Library.
Can I answer that in a couple of different ways? Firstly, to challenge the premise of your question. You say the Law Society is expensive. Of your practicing certificate fee, over 80% goes to regulation, to the Solicitor Regulation Authority, to the to Leo, and to the SDT. So a very small part of it goes to the representative body. I think were the Law Society to subscribe to PLC and make it free to everyone, then PLC wouldn't have a business model.
No, not to everyone.
But
I said to the library, just to the law library.
To the law library. We have a very, very extensive law library, and I'd invite you to go and have a look at our website to use the Law Doc service, because you can use that free. They will do the research and give you the information, and lots of firms do that. So maybe the challenge to us is to make sure everybody knows more about it.
I do use the library,
yeah.
But they don't have PLC.
No, they don't have PLC.
Right. So,
No.
what's the answer? No.
Well, they could have PLC, but as I said, they couldn't make it free to everybody to use because that would presumably breach the licensing agreement.
Well, not every
but-
solicitor around the country is going to go to the law library to look each day.
Well, we have a comprehensive library. PLC is a collection of data. You can get that information via the library without necessarily having to subscribe to PLC.
Okay. So the answer is no.
You can pay more for your practicing certificate if you like.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? The gentleman here, please.
Hi, good morning. I'm also from the Solicitors Journal. You mentioned about solicitors needing to have skills in coding going forward. It's not so much the second language they need. For the Solicitors Journal, we have a lot of young lawyers read the magazine. What would your advice be to them going forward on the skills that they might need in addition to the coding, and what they should be doing now to prepare for that in the future, 5 or 10 years later?
Yeah, well, I'd say, as a solicitor, I've been in practice for over 30 years, I'm very interested to hear about these new skills as well. They're not things I've thought of. And the lesson for me when I talk to people who tell me these things is actually to think laterally. Don't just think about traditional routes. Try and think forward about what people are going to need in the future and to differentiate themselves from others. It's very, very competitive. There are thousands and thousands of people coming through. How do you stand out from the crowd in doing that? What sector are you interested in working in? Maybe that's going to drive you down a particular route too early, but if that's what the market requires, maybe it'll be not just speaking Mandarin, but writing it as well. Maybe it'll be learning coding. Maybe it'll be something else that I don't know about. But you really have to think about it very hard in a competitive market because it's driven by what the clients will require. Much more now than simply what the firms want to sell to the clients. What do you think the clients are going to require? What kind of new clients are they going to be? How things are going to change. So for all students, don't sit there and take it, but get in front of it, if you like. Read up, read as much as you can, be really well informed about where the world is, where the sectors are, what kind of firm you're going to be in, and what's the direction of that firm.
I asked Lord Wolfe yesterday, would he advise a young person to actually go into the law, bearing in mind the number of changes, etc. What would your thoughts on that be?
Yes, absolutely. Go into it. It's a great profession. I'm very proud to be a solicitor, and I know that all the people I see, I was going to say young people, all the people I see coming into the Law Society to become admitted are very proud of that. They're very proud of the ethics. But be aware of what you're doing. It is very competitive, but there's a huge amount you can take from it and give back to society. So absolutely yes.
Sure. A couple of questions there, please.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Isaacs from BBC Legal. Do you think there's a threat of other professionals treading on the territory of solicitors? And if so, do you envisage the day where other professionals are getting the benefits of privilege for giving things like tax law advice?
Well, that's a topical question. It's always possible. But legal professional privilege is something we guard and we are very proud of. I think it's misnamed as legal professional privilege. It's really client's professional privilege because the privilege belongs to the client, not the lawyers. And I'm disappointed that the government have used some rather negative language, Theresa May, describing LPP being used by naughty lawyers, which is, you wouldn't hear perhaps speaking about Catholic priests hiding behind the seat of the confessional being naughty priests. Using that language for solicitors is unfortunate. But it comes from the professional ethics that we have. Solicitors are officers of the court. Our primary duty is to the court, to uphold the rule of law and administration of justice. That's a very different obligation to other professions. So you hear sometimes, I hear that solicitors should be compared with doctors in the way they're regulated. Doctors are mostly employed by the state and their basic job is to keep the patient alive. We have a very, very different professional obligation. So whilst I understand the argument about other professions having legal professional privilege or something like it, I think it has to be seen in the wider context of what our obligations are as to the court, if you like. So if you want to have the same obligations, that you can have it, but you can't have part of it, if you like. That ability to have the client to have that privilege is extremely important for the legal profession, whoever is practicing.
I think there's a question back there.
Hello, my name is Diane Flowers from Weller's Law Group in Bromley. I do a few talks a few times a month to students in colleges, sixth formers, that kind of age range, say between 15 to 18. And what I'm finding is that the traditional route to go into the law is still the one that's being pushed in the schools, and they don't understand the various routes that they can take to go into the law, really until they reach the last year of university. It's still what was said in my day: you do your GCSEs, you do your A-levels, you do your degree, you do your LPC, and cross your fingers you get a training contract. I don't know what work the Law Society does with schools. It's not mentioned to me when I go into colleges, but is part of the Law Society's future plans to go into the schools, not the universities, the colleges and the school, and say there's something called a paralegal, there's something called a legal executive, because when I'm going into the schools, they just don't know. They're not finding out like I did until the last year, or when you start your LPC. When I was studying, I didn't even know what a paralegal was until I was 22. So what I'm really saying is the Law Society needs to go into the colleges, and they need to go into the schools, and they need to be mentioning at a very, very early stage, these are the routes that are available to you, because I'm reading on the Law Gazette all the shake-ups that are happening with training, the keyword apprenticeships at the moment, but it's not filtering down to young children. You saying that, you know, it's getting to a point where you may need to start thinking of more early on what area of law you want to go into. They're just not knowing this, and I think that the Law Society needs to not focus on university students, but you need to be going down to students who are in their GCSE routes and saying, you know what, the traditional route is all very well and good, but there are other routes, and I think you need to get that message down earlier on.
Okay, thank you. Interesting challenge. In my day, it was Law Society finals and articles, so something's changed. You know, I would say that there's a challenge there. You mentioned legal executives and paralegals. They have their own organisations, Silex and Institute of Paralegals. So, as the Law Society of England and Wales, as the representative body for solicitors, it's not for me to press those routes. But I do take the challenge that people need to know earlier on. Having said that, there are still many, many thousands of people coming through the routes all the time. In fact, many more people than there are already jobs. But the point about your challenge that I certainly take is about diversity and social inclusion. Because social inclusion is absolutely key to increasing diversity. So taking people from all walks of life, whatever their social background, and making them understand that they can qualify is really, really important. Whether they stay as paralegals or legal executives or become solicitors, I think it's a very important piece of work. We certainly do a lot of work with the Sutton Trust, Pathways into Law, for example, and I've certainly met students. I've been into schools with a Citizenship Foundation, and lots of people do know about it, but I do accept we can do more in that area.
You are, of course, the president of the Law Society, but of course it's the Solicitors Society, really, isn't it? Don't you think there should be perhaps one Law Society covering barristers, paralegals, legal execs, the whole range?
The Law Society is by far the largest of the professional representative bodies. We have 166,000 solicitors. I think there are around 15,000 barristers. I'm not sure how many legal executives there are, but they of course mostly work for firms of solicitors. There aren't any, I think, any firms of legal execs. The Council for Licensed Conveyancers have, I think, around 4,000, I quote me on that because I'm not sure, around 230 firms, so relatively small, and of course many licensed conveyancers work for firms of solicitors. Well, you know, the government has wanted to have more change and more competition for a long time. So were there to be one body, I think the current stance is that would be anti-competitive. As regards fusion, and it's an interesting question you're going on to, fusion of solicitors and barristers. In many, many jurisdictions around the world, there is fusion. In Canada, there is completely. You can be a solicitor or barrister, but you practice in the same firm. You can be a specialist advocate or not. And some senior members of the judiciary have talked to me about that. I think you'd have to ask the Bar Council, who would take perhaps a different view. I personally think that will be driven by the economy, particularly as legal aid will impact very heavily on barristers, and particularly junior barristers, because that isn't available for criminal defence work.